Go click the subscribe button so you do not miss a single action-packed upload. Dive into the shadows of Florida's underworld, where the sun shines brightest, the secrets run deepest.
Deep dive. The sun baked the varnish on the teak rail under my hand, warm and smooth as polished bone. Down below, the tide chuckled against the pilings of the marina, a lazy, hypnotic rhythm. Another Tuesday afternoon, melting away in the South Florida haze. Smelled of salt, diesel fumes, and the faint sweet rot of the mangroves over on the spoil island. I leaned back in the fighting chair of the Sea Witch, my bare feet propped up, letting the heat seep into muscles that reminded me more often than I liked that 40 wasn't 30 anymore. Especially not this side of 40. The beer sweating in my hand was cold enough to make my teeth ache, just the way I liked it. Peace. Paid for, hard-earned, and about as reliable as a politician's promise. Which is why the sound of expensive Italian loafers crunching on the crushed shell path leading down the dock grated on my nerves before I even saw the guy. You don't hear that sound much around this end of the basin, where the working boats and the liveaboards like me kept things simple. Further down, where the gleaming multi-million-dollar plastic palaces bobbed like fat white ducks, you got your Gucci loafers and your deck shoes that cost more than my monthly slip fee. He stopped at the foot of my gangway, a silhouette against the blinding glare off the water. Tall, thin, dressed in a pale linen suit that probably cost 4 figures and still managed to look wrinkled and uncomfortable in the humidity. He clutched a slim leather briefcase like it was a life raft. Definitely not a neighbor dropping by to borrow some chum. Mr. Kincaid. His voice was reedy, stretched thin. City money, trying too hard. I didn't move, just squinted at him. Depends who's asking. My name is Arthur Pym. I represent Mr. Silas Thorne. He shifted his weight, the loafers crunching again. Nerves. Or maybe just expensive shoes on cheap gravel. He wishes to engage your services. Silas Thorne. The name rang a bell, distant and heavy, like a buoy clang in fog. Old money, real estate, philanthropy. The kind of name that got whispered when big checks were written for hospital wings or art museum galas. The kind of name usually attached to lawyers in sharper suits than this Pym fellow was wearing. I took a slow pull from my beer. My services aren't usually advertised in the society pages, Mr. Pym. How'd Mr. Thorne find my little hideaway? Pym cleared his throat, dabbing at his temple with a folded handkerchief that looked suspiciously like silk. Mr. Thorne has extensive resources. He was given your name by a mutual acquaintance who vouched for your discretion and effectiveness in certain sensitive matters. Sensitive matters. I let the words hang in the hot, still air. Usually meant messy matters. The kind that left stains you couldn't easily wash out. The kind I'd been trying to leave behind, swapping them for the relative honesty of chasing tarpon. I'm mostly retired from that line of work. More interested in tide charts than trouble these days. Mr. Thorne is prepared to be extremely generous regarding your fee, Pym said quickly, maybe a little too quickly. He gestured vaguely towards the gleaming row of mega yachts further down the marina. He understands the value of expertise. I swung my legs down, the deck warm under my feet. Sat up straighter. The cheap plastic seat of the fighting chair creaked in protest. Cunning, maybe. But the body kept score. Generosity is nice. Doesn't pay for aggravation. I looked past him, out towards the inlet where a charter boat was heading in, trailing optimistic gulls. What kind of sensitive matter are we talking about? If it involves unhappy wives or runaway kids, I can give you the number of a guy. Pym took a hesitant step closer, lowering his voice, though the nearest boat was 50 yards away and probably only housed hungover deckhands. It involves finances, Mr. Kincaid. Specifically, certain irregularities Mr. Thorne has become aware of. Transactions connected to several high-end resort properties along the coast. Resorts. I thought of the glossy brochures, the guarded gates, the the manufactured paradise sold to wealthy snowbirds and international tourists. Places I avoided like month-old bait. His resorts. Properties in which Mr. Thorne has significant interests, Pym corrected, choosing his words carefully. He has reason to believe funds are being moved inappropriately. Siphoned, perhaps, through complex channels. He requires someone who can operate outside conventional methods, someone who can look into the shadows without drawing attention. Look into shadows. I grunted. A poetic way of saying, break a few rules, maybe a few laws, and don't get caught. Why not his own security? Or the police? Pym flinched just slightly. The situation requires absolute discretion. Bringing in official channels at this stage could complicate matters irreparably. There are reputations at stake. Considerable ones. He licked his lips. Mr. Thorne suspects the activity might be more than simple embezzlement. Potentially linked to less savory elements. Less savory elements. In Florida, that covered a lot of ground, from smuggled parrots to stolen art to things that went bang in the night. Tied to luxury resorts. That narrowed the field, but didn't make it any prettier. It smelled complicated. The kind of complicated that starts with quiet observation and ends with loud noises and sirens. The kind of job I didn't want anymore. But Pym hadn't mentioned the figure Thorne considered extremely generous. And the Sea Witch needed a new transmission. I stared at Pym, standing there sweating in his expensive suit, holding his briefcase like a shield. He looked like a man sent to hire a wolf, hoping it wouldn't bite the hand offering the leash. Silas Thorne, I said, testing the name again. Wants me to poke around his fancy hotels because someone's skimming the till, and he's worried it's connected to hoods. I picked up my beer, found it disappointingly warm now. Tell me, Mr. Pym, why does that sound like the polite version of a much dirtier story? Chapter 2. Pym's Adam's apple did a nervous little jig in his throat. He glanced back towards the gleaming white yachts, as if Silas Thorne himself might be watching through binoculars from some air-conditioned bridge. Mr. Kincaid, he began, his voice smoother now, practiced. Every story has layers. Mr. Thorne is peeling back the first one. He needs to know what's underneath before deciding how, forcefully, to proceed. The figure he proposes reflects the necessary discretion and the potential unpleasantness. He named a number then, one with enough zeros on the end to make even a jaded semi-retiree sit up and blink. Enough to buy 2 new transmissions, and maybe throw in a radar upgrade. I let the silence stretch, listening to the water slap the hull. Aggravation money. Hazard pay. Hush money, maybe. All right, Pym. You can tell Thorne I'll take a look. No promises. I poke around, see if the shadows bite back. If it looks like it's going to get deeper than my wading boots can handle, I walk. And I keep the retainer. I held his gaze. That clear? He visibly relaxed, the tension easing out of his thin shoulders. Perfectly. Mr. Thorne understands your methods are your own. He simply requires results. Or at least, clarity. This contains the initial retainer, background on the properties in question, primarily the Palmetto Shores Grand and the Azure Star Resort, and a contact number for encrypted updates. He extended the slim leather briefcase he'd been guarding. It felt heavier than it looked. Right, I said, taking it. Now, if you don't mind, Mr. Pym, I was enjoying the particular quality of sunlight available only to the gainfully unemployed. He gave a tight little nod, mumbled something about being in touch, and crunched his way back up the dock, disappearing around a stack of lobster traps. I watched him go, then hefted the briefcase. Felt the weight of the cash inside. Felt the weight of the unwelcome job settling onto my shoulders. Piece bought and paid for, just got put on layaway. The Palmetto Shores Grand wasn't grand, it was obscene. A sprawling monument to excess, plonked down on 300 yards of what used to be prime turtle nesting beach. Pink stucco, green tile roofs, acres of glass reflecting the relentless sun. Fountains splashed water recycled from God knows where, into pools dyed an unnatural blue. The air hummed with the drone of industrial-strength air conditioning, fighting a losing battle against the coastal humidity. I'd parked the rented, suitably anonymous sedan, a faded blue Ford that blended with the employee vehicles, at the edge of the vast parking lot near the service entrance. Thorne's backgrounder was thorough, floor plans, executive names, holding companies layered like an onion. But paper doesn't tell you how a place feels, how it breathes. For 2 days, I just watched. From the public beach access, pretending to be just another tourist escaping the Midwest chill. From a table at the overpriced tiki bar nursing lukewarm beers, watching the staff entrances and loading docks. From the anonymous Ford, sweating through my shirt and eating stale crackers. Most of it was exactly what you'd expect. Armies of housekeeping staff in beige uniforms. Groundskeepers wrestling bougainvillea. Valets sprinting for tips. Food service trucks rumbling in and out. But there were discrepancies. Little things that snagged at the edge of my perception. The security wasn't just resort security. Some of the guards moved with a coiled readiness, eyes scanning rooftops, hands never far from their sides. They didn't look like guys worried about stolen towels. More like guys worried about incoming ordnance. Then there were the deliveries. Twice, late at night, long after the produce and linen trucks had departed, unmarked panel vans arrived at the main loading bay. No company logos. Handled by a separate crew, supervised by one of the coiled spring security types. Heavy crates, handled with unusual care, whisked inside. It wasn't slot machines or cases of champagne. It felt different. Colder. On the third night, I got closer, using a pair of image-intensifying binoculars from the shadowed edge of the mangrove fringe bordering the property. One of the crates, poorly sealed, showed stenciling under the harsh loading bay lights. Cyrillic characters. And a familiar international shipping code I'd last seen on confiscated hardware in a dusty warehouse in Gdansk years ago. Hardware that didn't belong anywhere near pink stucco and pudding greens. Hardware that went bang. My gut tightened. This wasn't just skimming. Thorne's less savory elements were playing in a much bigger league. Arms trafficking, maybe. Running through a 5-star resort. It had a certain lunatic audacity. Florida had always been a gateway, a swampy back door into the Americas. Maybe the doors were just getting fancier. Thorne's money suddenly felt inadequate. The Azure Star Resort made the Palmetto Shores look like a motel. All chrome, glass, and minimalist chic, perched on an artificial island connected by a causeway. Tonight, it was hosting the annual Sea Turtle Preservation Gala. Judging by the Bentleys and Maseratis clogging the valet stand, the sea turtles were doing okay, or at least their wealthy benefactors were. Thorne's package included an invitation. Mr. Jack Kincaid in guest. No guest tonight. Just me, stuffed into a dark suit I kept for weddings and funerals, feeling like a fraud. The air inside was chilled to Arctic levels, thick with competing perfumes and the murmur of money talking to money. Champagne flutes clinked like tiny bells. I bypassed the ballroom where tan skeletons rattled their jewelry and made for the terrace overlooking the moonlit bay. Find a quiet corner, watch the players, see who talked to whom. Thorne suspected the financial leaks originated higher up the food chain than middle management. A gala like this was prime hunting ground. I leaned on the railing, looking like just another bored husband waiting for his wife to finish air kissing. Across the terrace, near a cluster of potted palms, I saw him. Not Thorne, but someone I recognized from the Palmetto Shores surveillance, one of the special security guys. Out of uniform now, wearing an ill-fitting tuxedo, his eyes doing the same restless scanning. He wasn't enjoying the party. He was working. He kept glancing towards a secluded alcove where a woman stood alone, nursing a drink. She was stunning in a way that demanded attention, Dark hair swept up, emerald dress shimmering like fish scales, posture radiating impatience. She looked bored, dangerous, maybe both. The security guy subtly shifted position, angling himself to keep her in his line of sight, but also watching the flow of guests near the alcove. Waiting for someone. Then I saw the quick exchange. A man, older, silver-haired, impeccably dressed, drifted towards the alcove. He didn't stop, just brushed past the woman. For a fraction of a second, their hands were close. I saw her fingers close around something small, palm it discreetly. A folded napkin? A room key? Hard to tell from this distance. The silver-haired man melted back into the crowd. The woman waited a beat, then turned and headed inside towards the elevators. The security man relaxed almost imperceptibly, then faded back towards the service corridors. It was smooth, professional, and utterly out of place amidst the brittle chatter about stock options and yacht maintenance. My instinct screamed. I moved, cutting through the oblivious crowd, keeping the woman in sight. She stabbed the elevator button, glancing impatiently at the indicator light. As the doors chimed open, she stepped inside, fumbling slightly with her small beaded clutch. Something white fluttered to the plush carpet, just as the doors slid shut. A folded cocktail napkin. Quickly, before anyone else noticed, I bent and scooped it up. It wasn't blank. Inside, written in small, precise block letters, was a sequence. As star. Luna. 2300. T Delta. Confirm Echo 7. Not a phone number. Not a shopping list. It felt cold, deliberate. Coded. Confirmation of what? A meeting. A shipment? Echo 7. Delta. Terms that smelled less like resort management and more like military-grade logistics. I tucked the napkin into my inside pocket, the cheap paper suddenly feeling heavy as lead. The pleasant fiction that I was just looking into some creative accounting evaporated like sea mist in the morning sun. Thorne's unwelcome job had just sprouted fangs. Global Arms Syndicate. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Pim hadn't just offered me a dirty story, he'd hired me to walk into the middle of it. Chapter 3. The chilled air of the Azure Star clung to my suit like a shroud as I walked out into the thick, humid embrace of the Florida night. Valets scurried, engines purred, diamonds glittered under the port coach lights. Polite predators heading back to their climate-controlled dens. I clutched the napkin in my pocket, the cryptic message feeling like a hot coal against my chest. As star. Luna. 2300. T Delta. Confirm Echo 7. Azure Star. Tonight. 11 p.m. Something involving Delta, confirmation needed for Echo 7. It wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. The Cyrillic markings, the coiled spring security, the discreet handoff, the coded message, they painted a picture far uglier than Silas Thorne's financial irregularities. This smelled like high-stakes smuggling, the kind where mistakes get buried deep and witnesses disappear into the mangroves. I needed someone who heard the whispers below the waterline, someone plugged into the grimy circuitry of the docks and the back channels. I needed Finn's Delaney. I drove the anonymous Ford away from the manufactured glamour, heading south towards the working end of the Intracoastal, where the marinas smelled of fish guts and creosote, not expensive perfume. Finn's ran a dilapidated bait and tackle shop near Pelican Harbor Marina, mostly as a front for his real business, information. He knew who was moving what, who was stepping on whose toes, who was likely to end up wearing concrete shoes. He wasn't cheap, and he wasn't brave, but his information was usually good, filtered through a healthy layer of self-preservation. The shop was dark, closed for the night, the gone fishing sign looking permanent. I went around back, down the narrow oyster shell alley that separated the shop from a noisy Cuban dive bar leaking loud music and fried plantain smells. A single bare bulb illuminated Finn's back door. I gave it the old rhythm knock, shave and a haircut. Silence for a long moment. Then the rattle of a chain lock and the door cracked open an inch. An eye, watery and suspicious, peered out. "Kincaid. Hell you doing here this time of night?" Finn's voice was a gravelly whisper. "Need to talk, Finns." "Business." "Closed." "It won't wait. It involves some of the fancy resorts up the coast. And maybe some people who don't belong there." I took out a folded bill from Thorne's retainer, 100, and held it where he could see it through the crack. Enough to get his attention. The door opened wider. Finns Delaney looked older than I remembered. His face a roadmap of bad decisions and too much sun, his faded fishing shirt stained with something that might have been blood or bait. He snatched the 100 like a gull grabbing a French fry. All right. Keep it down." He pulled me inside, locking the door quickly behind us. The air hung thick with the smell of stale beer, dead shrimp, and fear. "What resorts?" he asked, not meeting my eye, fiddling with a rusty scaling knife on his cluttered counter. "Palmetto Shores. Azure Star." He flinched. "Stopped fiddling. Big money. Big fences. You don't want to stir that water, Kincaid." "I'm already stirring. Seeing things I don't like. Unmarked vans, heavy crates, security that looks military surplus. Recognize any of it?" He swallowed hard. "Look man, people talk. Stuff moves through those places, yeah. Always has. Usually just high-end contraband. Art, maybe jewels, funny money needing a wash. This feels different, Finns. Colder. I saw Cyrillic markings on a crate." His head snapped up, eyes wide now. The fear smell got stronger. "Russian. Ah hell, Kincaid. You gotta walk away. That ain't just contraband. That's Zukhov's people." Zukhov. The name wasn't familiar, but it had the right kind of ugly ring to it. Sergei Zukhov. Nasty piece of work. Ex-Spetsnaz, they say. Runs hardware. Serious stuff. Guns, explosives, anything that goes boom. Moved into the Caribbean basin last few years, using legitimate businesses as cover. Thorne's Resorts. Yeah, I heard whispers Zukhov's operation bought access, using the logistics as cover. Moving merchandise through, untraceable. He wiped sweat from his brow with the back of a grimy hand. "That security you saw. That's his muscle. Ex-military mercs. Not guys you want to cross." So Thorne wasn't just being skimmed. His resorts were being used as depots by a major international arms dealer. My unwelcome job was looking more like a suicide mission. This coded message. I started thinking about the napkin, but never got the words out. Whump. The back door splintered inwards, ripped off its hinges. Two figures filled the doorway, big men, dressed in dark clothes, faces obscured by shadows and pulled-down baseball caps. Both held silenced pistols, steady and professional. Not junkies looking for a score. These were pros. Zukhov's mercs. Had they followed me? Or was Finns already compromised? Finns yelped, diving behind the counter. Smart move, but not smart enough. One of the silenced pistols coughed, fut-fut. A grunt, a sickening thud from behind the counter. No time to check on Finns. No time for questions. I reacted on pure instinct, kicking over a tall display rack of fishing rods and tackle boxes, sending hooks, lures, and line flying towards the intruders. A momentary distraction, nothing more. I spun, vaulted over the counter at the far end, ignoring the crunch of Finn's body, and slammed through the flimsy employee bathroom door. Another silenced shot whizzed past my ear, chunking into the doorframe. I didn't stop, kicked open the small, grime-streaked window over the toilet, and wriggled out into the alley, oyster shells digging into my palms. Behind me, I heard them smashing through the bathroom door. My boat. The Sea Witch. It was my only chance. 2 blocks down, Pelican Harbor slips. I ran, suit jacket flapping, lungs burning. Streetlights cast long, distorted shadows. The humid air felt like wet wool in my throat. Headlights swept the alley entrance behind me, as I burst out onto the street. A dark sedan, engine revving. They were fast. I sprinted down the main dock road, the marina lights reflecting off the dark water. Keys already in my hand. Reached the Sea Witch, jumped aboard, ripped off the mooring lines with frantic speed. The engine coughed once, twice, then roared to life as I slammed the throttles forward. Too slow. A sleek, dark cigarette boat, idling silently at the end of the main channel, surged forward, its powerful engines vibrating through the water, blocking my path to the open intracoastal. The figures on board were just silhouettes, but I saw the glint of moonlight on metal. They weren't planning on asking questions either. I spun the wheel hard to port, sending the Sea Witch veering sharply between two rows of moored sailboats, hoping the narrow channel and the forest of masts would give me cover. The cigarette boat, faster and more maneuverable in open water, hesitated for a second, then followed, its deeper draft scraping ominously close to the shallower bottom. The chase was on. Through the maze of docks and channels, the roar of my old diesel engines straining against the throaty growl of their high-performance pursuers. Spray flew, wakes slammed against hulls, mooring lines strained. This wasn't a quiet investigation anymore. This was survival. And South Florida had a lot of dark water to get lost in, if you lived long enough to find it. Chapter 4. The cigarette boat was gaining. Its twin engines screamed like banshees, throwing up a phosphorescent rooster tail in the narrow channel. My old diesel was hammering its heart out, but the Sea Witch was built for comfort and range, not raw speed. They were closing the gap, close enough now that I could see the hard glint in the eyes of the man braced in the bow, the one holding something that wasn't a fishing rod. Time to stop running and start thinking. Or more accurately, use the local geography as a weapon. Up ahead, where the canal fed into the wider, shallower bay, was a notorious stretch locals called the Prop Eater, a maze of shifting sandbars and submerged oyster beds hidden just inches below the murky surface at low tide. Tonight, the tide was going out. I kept the throttles wide open, aiming straight for the center of the bay, acting like I was making a break for open water. Behind me, the cigarette boat mirrored my course, confident in its superior speed. Closer now. 50 yards. 40. I could hear the high-pitched whine of their engines over my own deeper roar. At the last possible second, I spun the wheel hard to starboard, simultaneously cutting the throttle. The Sea Witch heeled over violently, her broad beam sliding in the water, momentum carrying her sideways towards a narrow, almost invisible cut in the mangrove line I knew led back towards a network of shallow tidal creeks. It was a gamble. Misjudge the entrance or the depth, and I'd be aground myself. The cigarette boat, committed to its straight-line speed and deeper draft, couldn't react fast enough. They tried to turn, engines howling in protest, but their sharp V-hull dug in. There was a sickening, high-pitched screech of fiberglass on sand, followed by a violent crunch, as their props found something harder than mud. The boat lurched to a sudden, awkward stop, tilted at an angle, engines abruptly silent. One of the figures pitched forward, almost going overboard. I didn't wait to admire my handiwork. I punched the throttle again, guiding the Sea Witch carefully into the mangrove cut. Branches scraped against the hull, leaves showered the deck. The creek twisted and turned, barely wider than the boat in places, the water dark and oily, smelling of mud and decay. Behind me, angry shouts echoed faintly over the water, but they weren't going anywhere fast. Not without new props, and maybe a new lower unit. I navigated the back creeks for another 20 minutes by feel and memory, finally emerging into a different section of the intracoastal miles south, melting into the sparse late-night boat traffic. A couple of shrimpers heading out, a lone sailboat under power. I killed my running lights and throttled back, letting the engine settle into a quiet rumble, becoming just another shadow on the dark water. Temporary safety. My hands were shaking, reaction setting in. Adrenaline drained away, leaving behind the familiar aches and a cold knot of dread in my stomach. Fins Delaney. Shot down in his own shop because I'd come asking questions. His last words echoed in my head. Zukhov's people. Nasty piece of work. Runs hardware. You ain't the only one sniffing around, Kincaid. Some reporter bitch asking too many questions. Dangerous for her. Dangerous for anyone she talks to. A reporter. Asking questions about Zukhov, about the resorts. Dangerous. Maybe. But right now, Zukhov's people knew my face, knew my boat. They'd know Fins was talking to me. They wouldn't stop looking. Silas Thorne's money was feeling thinner by the minute. I needed information, leverage, anything to get ahead of the wave that was about to crash down on me. This reporter, was she a potential ally, someone else digging into Zukhov's operation? Or was she just another liability? Another person likely to get caught in the crossfire, maybe even draw more attention my way. I needed her name. Fins hadn't given it. But he'd said she was asking questions. I eased the Sea Witch into a quiet anchorage behind a mangrove island, cut the engine, and let the silence settle, broken only by the lapping water and the whine of insects. I dug out the encrypted sat phone Pim had provided. It felt dirty using Thorne's resources, but my usual contacts wouldn't touch anything potentially involving Zukhov without triple the danger pay. I punched in the number Pim had given me, waited for the secure handshake, then sent a short coded text. Query: journalist, female, investigating Zukhov Florida Ops, Associated Resort Holdings. Recent inquiries. Urgent. The reply came back faster than I expected. Equally terse. Varga, Maria. Freelance. Stringer for Miami Herald, others. Known for deep dives, corporate malfeasance. Tread carefully. Associated with prior controversial reports. Burn sources. Maria Varga. Freelance. Burn sources. Tread carefully. Not exactly a ringing endorsement. Sounded like a firecracker, maybe unstable, definitely risky. But she was digging. She might know things I didn't. Might have puzzle pieces that fit the gaps around Zukhov, the resorts, the coded napkin still burning a hole in my pocket. Talking to her was a gamble. Not talking to her, staying blind while Zukhov's men hunted me, felt like a worse one. 2 hours later, after ditching the anonymous Ford miles away, and catching a ride-share smelling faintly of cheap cigars and desperation, I was in Miami. Little Havana. The air here felt different, thicker, charged with rhythm, smelling of strong coffee, exhaust fumes, and roasting pork. Even after midnight, the streets weren't empty. Music spilled from half-open doorways, neon signs cast pools of garish color on the wet pavement left by an earlier shower. I found the place Varga supposedly frequented, the Café Elegante. It wasn't elegant. It was a brightly lit, slightly grimy storefront place, linoleum floor, 4 mica tables, ceiling fans stirring the thick air. A handful of old men argued politics over dominoes in one corner. A couple of younger guys watched a soccer match, flickering on a TV mounted high on the wall. Behind the counter, a stout woman dispensed tiny cups of high-octane Cuban coffee. And in a booth near the back, nursing a café con leche and hunched over a beat-up laptop, was a woman who matched the description my contact had provided. Dark, intense eyes that scanned the room periodically, thick black hair pulled back in a messy bun, maybe late 30s. She wore a faded denim jacket over a simple black top, looked like she hadn't slept much, and radiated a kind of restless energy even sitting still. Maria Varga. I got a cafecito at the counter, black, sweet, strong enough to strip paint, and took a seat at the table closest to her booth, facing the door but angled so I could watch her without being obvious. She didn't look up. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, stopped, flew again. Deep in whatever hole she was digging. Was she digging into Zukhov? Was she the woman in the emerald dress from the gala? No, the build was different, the vibe miles apart. That woman was cold calculation. Varga looked like simmering frustration. I waited a few minutes, letting the caffeine jolt hit my system. Then I stood up, walked over to her booth. She looked up as my shadow fell over her laptop screen, eyes narrowing instantly, suspicion flaring like a struck match. Defiant. Wary. Definitely not welcoming. Miss Varga. I kept my voice low, neutral. Maria Varga. Her gaze flickered past me towards the door, assessing potential threats, then back to me. No fear, just sharp appraisal. Who's asking? Her voice was low, slightly husky, with just a trace of an accent I couldn't place. My name isn't important right now, I said. What's important is that I think we might be interested in the same people. People who own fancy resorts. People who move dangerous things through dark channels. People who don't like reporters asking questions. I paused, holding her gaze. People who just tried to kill me for talking to someone who mentioned your name. Chapter 5. Maria Varga's dark eyes didn't waver. The suspicion remained, but now it was mixed with a spark of sharp, calculating interest. She took a slow sip of her café con leche, her gaze sweeping over me, cataloging details, the suit that didn't quite belong in this café, the weariness around my eyes, maybe the lingering tension from the boat chase. People try to kill you, she repeated, her voice still low but losing none of its edge. That puts you in a crowded club around here. Doesn't make you my friend. Who did you talk to? Who mentioned my name? A man named Fins Delaney. Bait shop near Pelican Harbor. Her expression tightened, almost imperceptibly. A flicker of recognition. Regret. Fins. You talked to Fins tonight? She leaned forward slightly. Is he? He didn't make it, I said flatly. Two men, professional hardware, silenced. They came in right after he mentioned your name in connection with resorts owned by Silas Thorne and a nasty piece of work named Zukhov. She leaned back, absorbing that. Silas Thorne. Zukhov. Fins. Dead. She chewed on her lower lip, her gaze distant for a moment, connecting dots I couldn't see yet. Fins pointed you at me? Why? He said I wasn't the only one asking questions about Zukhov and the resorts. Said a reporter was digging. That talking to you was dangerous. I decided to gamble, pulling out the cocktail napkin I'd retrieved at the Azure Star Gala. I slid it across the Formica tabletop. Maybe this means something to you. Picked it up tonight at the Sea Turtle fundraiser. She glanced down at the napkin, her eyes widening slightly as she read the coded message, as star. Luna. 2300. T Delta. Confirm Echo 7. Her gaze snapped back up to mine, sharp and intense. Where exactly did you get this? Came from a woman in an emerald dress. Handed off by an older, silver-haired man. Watched by security I recognized from the Palmetto Shores Grand, Zukhov's muscle, according to Fins. Varga stared at the napkin, then back at me. Okay, she said slowly, making a decision. Maybe we do have something to talk about. That code. Azstar, yeah, the resort. Luna, tonight. 2,300 hours, that time has passed, must have been the handoff signal. T Delta. That's the designation for the primary lot at tonight's event. And Echo 7. That's the confirmation code needed for high-level buyers. Event? I asked. What event? Not a charity gala, she said, a humorless smile touching her lips. The real party Zukhov throws. An auction. Tonight. Very exclusive, very private. He uses them to move special items, connect with powerful clients under the guise of acquiring art or antiques. She tapped the napkin. This confirms the prize tonight is Delta. And based on chatter I've picked up the last few weeks, Delta isn't a painting. What is it? Weapon schematics, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Next generation stuff. Classified. Supposedly offloaded from a hacked Pentagon server. Enough technical data to give any rogue state or terrorist group a hell of an advantage. That's Zukhov's real merchandise. My blood ran cold. This was infinitely worse than smuggled Kalashnikovs. Classified weapons plans sold to the highest bidder. Thorne's resorts weren't just depots. They were part of the infrastructure facilitating this nightmare. Where is this auction? Private island. Belongs to a shell corporation Zukhov controls. Off the keys. Invitation only, biometric security, the whole 9 yards. Impossible to crash. But you knew about it, I countered. You knew what Delta and Echo 7 meant. I know because I cultivate sources Zukhov would kill, she said simply. I was trying to find a way to get eyes inside, but, she shrugged, freelance budget doesn't cover forged credentials for arms auctions. An idea sparked, ugly but necessary. Thorne's money. Thorne's connections accessed through Pim's sat phone. It was risky exposing myself further, but sitting here while those plans got sold was unthinkable. Maybe, I said carefully, I can arrange an invitation. If you can provide a plausible cover identity, background info I can use. She studied me again. You think you can just walk in there? As who? They vet buyers meticulously. Let me worry about the invitation, I said. I need a name, a history. Someone with enough legitimate, or illegitimately acquired wealth to be credible. Someone who might believably be shopping for advanced technology. She thought for a moment, then nodded slowly. There's a shell corporation I've been tracking, based out of Panama, deals in rare earth minerals, suspected money laundering front. Argus Holdings. Untraceable CEO. If you could pass yourself off as their representative, maybe. It's thin, but it might work if the invitation looks genuine. Argus Holdings, I repeated. Okay. Give me everything you have on them. And I'll need a way to get to that island without showing up on Zukhov's official transport list. 3 hours later, I wasn't Jack Kincaid anymore. I was Mr. Julian Thorne, a little inside joke for Silas, representative of Argus Holdings Panama. Thanks to a hefty chunk of Thorne's retainer wired to one of Varga's shadier contacts, I had a flawless set of forged credentials, a background file uploaded to the right databases, and most importantly, a legitimate-looking auction invitation transmitted electronically after Pim's contact pulled some serious strings or greased some serious palms deep within Zukhov's network. Varga had provided the intel, the name, the background. Thorne's money funneled through Pim bought the access. An unholy alliance, held together by mutual desperation. Varga had also arranged transport, a local charter pilot she trusted, flying a battered old Grumman Goose amphibian, willing to risk a nighttime water landing in a secluded cove on the island, well away from the main dock and helipad for an exorbitant fee. The island rose out of the dark water like a jungle-covered jewel, ringed by discreet lights. The estate itself was perched on the highest point, a sprawling monstrosity of glass and white stone lit up like a cruise ship. Security was visible even from the air. Patrol boats on the perimeter, figures moving along the shoreline. The Grumman landed smoothly on the calm water of the cove. Engines cut quickly to silence. I paddled a small inflatable dinghy, the last 50 yards to a rocky beach obscured by sea grape trees, the warm water soaking my trousers. Getting from the beach past the perimeter guards and blending in with the arriving guests took some doing. A nerve-wracking crawl through dense undergrowth, a carefully timed dash across a manicured lawn, and a final bold walk through a service entrance I'd spotted from the air, nodding curtly at a bored-looking guard as if I owned the place. Inside, the air conditioning was frigid, the luxury oppressive. Marble floors, abstract art that probably cost more than my boat, hushed conversations in a dozen languages. The auction was being held in a grand salon overlooking the ocean. Rows of expensive chairs faced a polished mahogany stage. Waiters circulated with champagne. The attendees were a rogues gallery of international finance, shady politics, and outright thuggery, all dressed in expensive camouflage. I spotted the silver-haired man from the gala, holding court near the front. I saw Zukhov's coiled spring security men, discreetly positioned around the room. I took a seat near the back, trying to look bored and obscenely wealthy. The auctioneer, a man with the smooth patter of a Sotheby's veteran and the dead eyes of a mortician, took the stage. After a few preliminary items, suspiciously authenticated antiquities, a portfolio of bearer bonds, he arrived at the main event. "And now, ladies and gentlemen," he purred, a predatory gleam in his eye, "Lot Delta. A unique opportunity. Technical specifications, design documents, and testing data for a next-generation directed energy platform. Efficacy verified. Potential unlimited." A low murmur went through the crowd. On a large screen behind the auctioneer, complex diagrams and equations flashed, incomprehensible to me, but clearly recognized by many in the room. The bidding started high and climbed rapidly. 5 million. 10. 15. Voices called out bids, crisp and emotionless. The silver-haired man made a play, countered by a grim-faced woman with obvious diplomatic credentials from somewhere unpleasant. A man with the unmistakable look of cartel money jumped in. 20 million. 25. The air crackled with tension. These weren't collectors, they were buying power, the power to destabilize, to destroy. I scanned the room, my gut twisting. Then I saw him, standing quietly in a shadowed archway near the stage, observing the bidding with cold amusement. Sergei Zukhov himself. Older than I expected, impeccably tailored, a faint scar tracing his cheekbone. He caught my eye just for a second, his gaze sharp, analytical. Did he recognize me? No, impossible. But the intensity of his stare sent a chill down my spine. The bidding hit 30 million. The cartel man countered at 31. The silver-haired man conferred briefly with an aide, then shook his head, dropping out. It was down to the cartel and the grim-faced woman. 32 million, she snapped. The auctioneer looked towards the cartel bidder. 32 million. Do I hear 33? The cartel man smiled thinly, raised his paddle. 35. A gasp went through the room. A huge jump. The woman glared, then slowly, reluctantly, shook her head. 35 million, the auctioneer declared, his voice triumphant. Sold. He banged his gavel. Just like that, the plans were gone. Sold to a man who radiated casual brutality. But as the auctioneer moved on, I saw Zukhov give a subtle nod to one of his security men near the stage. The guard slipped away through a side door. Something felt wrong. It was too easy. Too public, almost. Was the auction itself just theater? My eyes were drawn back to the screen where the schematics had been displayed. Was the real transaction happening somewhere else entirely? Chapter 6. The polite applause following the sale of Lot Delta felt obscene, like cheering at a public execution. Guests began to rise, drifting towards the bars or out onto the moonlit terraces, the scent of expensive perfume mingling with the ozone tang of impending violence. My instincts screamed that the tidy sale to the cartel man was a head fake, a piece of performance art for the assembled piranhas. Zukhov hadn't gotten where he was by being predictable. That subtle nod to his man, the guard slipping away, where did he go? I lingered, letting the crowd thin, trying to appear casual as I scanned the periphery. Zukhov himself had vanished from the archway. The silver-haired man was gone too. I eased towards the side door the guard had used. It led to a service corridor, blessedly empty for the moment. Dimly lit, smelling of bleach and stale cigarette smoke. I listened. Faintly, from deeper within the estate's bowels, I heard the hum of heavy machinery, ventilation maybe, but nothing else. Following that guard blind felt like sticking my head into a hungry alligator's mouth. My priority had to be extraction. The deal with Varga was for her contact to pick me up in the Grumman Goose from the same cove an hour after the auction concluded. Time was ticking. Something felt fundamentally wrong here, and Zukhov's island was the last place I wanted to be when the curtain fell on whatever game he was playing. I slipped back out of the service corridor and melted into the remaining guests drifting towards the main exits, then veered off, heading back towards the service entrance I'd used earlier. Getting back out the way I came in was risky, but sticking to the plan felt marginally safer than improvising. The night air outside was thick and carried the scent of night-blooming jasmine, a cloying sweetness that couldn't mask the island's underlying tension. Sticking to the shadows, moving quickly across lawns that felt unnaturally springy underfoot, I made my way back towards the secluded cove. The moon was higher now, casting silvery light and deep shadows through the sea grape trees and palmettos. The inflatable dinghy should be right where I left it, pulled up behind a cluster of limestone rocks. As I neared the rocky outcrop, a figure detached itself from the deeper shadows near the water's edge. Maria Varga. My stomach tightened. She wasn't supposed to be here. She was supposed to be coordinating the pilot. "Kincaid?" she called softly, her voice carrying unnervingly in the stillness. Cutting it close. "Change of plans?" I asked, stopping about 10 yards away, letting my eyes adjust, scanning the tree line behind her, the rocks, the water. Something felt off. Her posture was too rigid, her tone lacking the usual cynical bite. "You could say that," she replied. And then 2 more figures stepped out from behind the rocks, flanking her. Big men, dressed in dark utility gear. One I recognized instantly, the coiled spring security man from the Palmetto Shores, the one from the Gala Terrace. Zukhov's muscle. They held compact machine pistols, leveled casually in my direction. My blood turned to ice water. "Varga. What the hell is this?" She gave a small, tired shrug, avoiding my eyes now, staring out at the dark water instead. "Things change, Kincaid. Opportunities arise. Zukhov appreciates initiative. And he doesn't like loose ends." "Loose ends? You set me up." The pieces slammed together. Pim's sat phone contact, the flawless invitation, the pilot she trusted. All fed to her by Zukhov. Or maybe she just sold me out, after I served my purpose. The intel. Argus Holdings. Was any of it real? "The intel on Zukhov is real enough," she said, finally meeting my gaze. There was no satisfaction there, just a kind of weary pragmatism. Too real. He's consolidating power, eliminating rivals. Those weapon plans. They're his leverage for the next phase. He couldn't risk someone like you interfering, poking around Thorne's operation. She gestured towards me. "You were a convenient way to flush out Thorne's interest, confirm his suspicions, and tie up a loose end, Fins. Zukhov sends his thanks, by the way. He prefers clean operations." "And you? What's your cut?" "An exclusive story. 30 pieces of silver?" The bitterness tasted like bile in my mouth. "Burn sources." The warning came back too late. "Survival," she said quietly. "And maybe a chance to actually expose the whole damn network, not just Zukhov. Sometimes you have to play the long game, Kincaid. Make deals with devils. Right now, you look pretty comfortable with the devils, Varga." I tensed, subtly shifting my weight, looking for any avenue of escape. There was none. Open beach behind me, water to the sides, jungle ahead, and 3 guns pointed at my chest. The security man beside Varga grunted impatiently. "Enough talk. Zukhov wants him dealt with quietly. Bring him." As they moved forward, Varga took a step back, turning slightly. In that brief moment, her hand dipped into the pocket of her denim jacket. Was she reaching for a weapon? A recorder? Her own sat phone? I didn't know, but it was the only chance I might get. I lunged, not at the guards, but at Varga. I slammed into her, grabbing for the hand in her pocket, knocking her off balance. She cried out in surprise and anger. Her fingers closed around a small hard object, a phone sleek and thin. My own fingers clamped down on hers, trying to wrestle it away. One of the guards cursed, swinging the butt of his weapon towards my head. I ducked, twisting, pulling Varga around as a shield. The blow glanced off my shoulder, sending a jolt of pain down my arm. Varga struggled fiercely, kicking backwards, trying to break free. "Get off me, you idiot!" The second guard fired a short burst, not at me, but into the sand near my feet, spitting up grit. A warning shot. Last chance. Cooperate. In the frantic struggle, my fingers slipped, but not before I ripped the sat phone from Varga's grasp. I shoved her hard towards the guards and bolted, not towards the water, but straight into the dense tangled jungle that bordered the cove. "Get him?" the lead guard roared. Branches whipped at my face as I plunged into the darkness under the canopy. Behind me, shouts, curses, and the crashing sound of pursuit. They wouldn't shoot wildly into the jungle. Not if Zukhov wanted it quiet, but they'd come after me. I ran, stumbling over roots, pushing through thick vegetation, adrenaline screaming through my veins. The island wasn't that big. They'd coordinate, try to corner me. I needed to get off this rock. The Grumman was out. The main dock was suicide. My eyes scanned the dark jungle floor as I ran. What had Varga been doing with that phone? Calling Zukhov? Recording me? Or something else? I risked a glance down at the phone clutched in my hand. Its screen was dark. Fingerprint lock, probably. Useless. Then my fingers brushed against something stuck to the back of the phone case. A small, almost invisible data chip, barely thicker than a fingernail, held on with a piece of tape. Varga must have palmed it just before I grabbed her. What was it? Her insurance policy. Her real prize. No time to think. I could hear them closing in behind me, moving through the undergrowth with practiced efficiency. I veered towards the sound of the surf on the island's windward side. Maybe find a cliff to hide under, a cave or a boat. Rich men always had toys. Jet skis, tenders, maintenance skiffs. Breaking through the last line of trees, I found myself on a narrow strip of sand facing the open ocean. And there, pulled up on the beach near a small service dock I hadn't seen from the air, was a battered, flat-bottomed aluminum skiff with a small outboard motor. Probably used by the groundskeepers. Keys dangling from the ignition. Sometimes, even a desperate man gets lucky. I sprinted for the skiff, splashing through the shallow water, hearing shouts erupt from the jungle edge behind me. I ripped the key, turned it. The outboard sputtered, coughed, then caught with a put-put-put that sounded deafeningly loud. A shot cracked through the air, whizzing past my head, kicking up spray. They weren't worried about quiet anymore. I slammed the motor into gear and gunned it, the little skiff bouncing over the waves, heading out into the vast darkness of the Atlantic. Behind me, the lights of Zukhov's island fortress began to recede. I risked a quick look at the phone, then peeled the tiny data chip off the back. Holding it between my thumb and forefinger, I wondered what secrets Varga had deemed important enough to hide there. What sliver of intel had I just bought, with Finn's Delaney's life and my own near miss? Only one way to find out. But first, I had to reach the mainland. And hope whatever was on this chip was worth it. The first file name I could make out, etched almost invisibly on the chip's casing, EGRSNL lock. Everglades Arsenal location. The swamp was calling. Chapter 7. The little aluminum skiff slapped against the waves, the two-stroke outboard whining bravely against the vastness of the open water. Dawn was a gray promise staining the eastern horizon by the time I saw the low silhouette of the Upper Keys Bridge emerge from the pre-dawn gloom. I ran the skiff aground on a muddy bank thick with mangroves, well away from any houses or roads, stepped out into knee-deep muck and didn't look back. Let Zukhov's people find it. It would tell them nothing they didn't already know, that I was off their island and heading for the mainland. Getting north took time, patience, and the last of the cash from Thorne's initial payment. A series of short hops. A fisherman heading back to Marathon, a trucker hauling produce up US 1 who didn't ask questions, and finally, a local bus smelling of stale sweat and disinfectant that dropped me near Homestead. From there, it was a long walk to retrieve my emergency cash, buried years ago beneath a particularly ugly concrete K-rail near a defunct canal pumping station. Inside the waterproof Pelican case, burner clothes, some basic gear, medical supplies, another untraceable phone, and a ruggedized micro laptop with a built-in multi-card reader. Back in a cheap motel room that vibrated every time a truck hit the rumble strips on the nearby highway, I plugged Varga's data chip into the reader. E.g., ARSNL lock. The chip wasn't encrypted, not exactly. Varga hadn't had time, maybe. Or maybe she assumed nobody else would get their hands on it. It contained layered satellite imagery of a specific quadrant deep within Everglades National Park, overlaid with complex vector lines, depth soundings for hidden channels, and thermal imaging data highlighting structures inconsistent with the surrounding terrain. Cross-referencing the coordinates with standard topographical maps pinpointed the location, a remote, elevated tree island or hammock, accessible only via a labyrinth of shallow waterways miles from any official park trails or ranger stations. Zukhov hadn't just found a hiding place, he'd found a fortress disguised as swampland. Getting there required specialized transport. My Sea Witch drew too much water. I needed an airboat. I used the new burner phone to call Coot, an old acquaintance who lived on the edge of the glades, making a living from guided fishing trips, frog gigging, and occasionally looking the other way or providing untraceable transport for the right price. He owed me, from a nasty business involving some stolen shrimp boats and a man with a grudge years ago. Kincaid. Thought you were dead or rich. Coot's voice crackled over the line, rough as rusted mesh. Neither, Coot. Need a favor. Need silent passage into the park. Specific coordinates. Need a reliable airboat, unmarked, leave it for me. No questions. There was a long pause. That area, bad medicine, Kincaid. Folks go in, don't always come out. You stirring up gators or something worse? Something worse, I admitted. Can you do it? Another pause, then a sigh like air leaking from a punctured tire. Marker cleared then. Boat'll be chained under the Tamiami Trail Bridge at marker 62. Usual spot. Keys hid in the fuel cap. Don't bring it back shot full of holes. He hung up. The airboat ride was like entering another dimension. Skimming over the sawgrass prairies, the roar of the aircraft engine behind me flattening the air, sending ripples across endless expanses of shallow water reflecting the bruised twilight sky. The deeper I went, the more the landscape closed in, shifting from open prairie to tangled mangrove tunnels and cypress stands draped in Spanish moss, the air thick with the buzz of insects and the smell of wet earth and decay. It was beautiful, in a menacing, primordial way. A place that swallowed secrets easily. Using the GPS coordinates from Varga's chip on a handheld unit, I navigated the maze of waterways Coot's directions had confirmed. As I neared the target coordinates, I cut the engine, letting the sudden silence press in, broken only by the chirps and croaks of the swamp's inhabitants. I switched to a silent electric trolling motor, ghosting the last few hundred yards towards the hammock indicated on the map. It rose from the surrounding swamp like a dark green fortress, a dense island of taller cypress, gumbo limbo, and oak trees. No obvious structures visible from the water level. Heavily camouflaged. But Varga's thermal data hadn't lied. As I got closer, hidden by a thick patch of cattails, I saw them, motion sensors tucked into tree bark, microscopic camera lenses glinting among the leaves, tripwires almost invisible against the leaf litter near the water's edge. This wasn't just hidden, it was guarded. I circled the hammock slowly, finding what looked like a narrow, concealed boat slip cut into the bank, shielded by overhanging willows. Fresh tracks in the mud indicated recent airboat traffic. This had to be the entry point. Getting inside wouldn't be easy. I needed to see what they were hiding. Leaving the airboat hidden, I slipped into the waist-deep, lukewarm water, moving with agonizing slowness towards the edge of the hammock, armed with only a waterproof pistol and a knife. The mud sucked at my boots. A water moccasin slid past, indifferent. I reached the bank near the boat slip, eased myself up, and began moving inland, testing every step, scanning the dense undergrowth. 50 yards in, the trees opened slightly into a small clearing. And there it was. Not just a building, but a reinforced concrete bunker, partially submerged, its roof camouflaged with transplanted vegetation. Heavy steel door, ventilation shafts, multiple antenna arrays barely visible through the canopy. Beside it, under a larger camo net, were stacks of oblong containers, standard military shipping containers, but painted a dull, non-reflective swamp green. Too large for small arms. Then I saw movement near the bunker entrance. 2 guards, dressed in the same kind of utility gear as the men on the island, carrying assault rifles, patrolling lazily. Zukhov's mercs. I ducked behind a massive cypress knee, heart pounding. One of the guards stopped, scratched his neck, then paused, tilting his head as if listening. Had I snapped a twig? Made too much noise in the water? He unslung his rifle, muttered something to his partner, and began walking slowly towards my position, his eyes scanning the tree line. No choice. Waiting meant getting pinned down, maybe surrounded. I raised my pistol, took careful aim as he stepped past a screen of ferns and squeezed the trigger twice. The silenced shots were barely audible over the insect hum, fut, fut. The guard grunted, stumbled, and fell face first into the mud. His partner reacted instantly, shouting an alarm, contact, while simultaneously spraying automatic fire towards my general location. Bullets ripped through the leaves around me, thudding into the cypress knee, sending splinters flying. Return fire erupted from the bunker entrance, more guards emerging. I fired back, aiming for suppression, then scrambled backwards, deeper into the dense foliage. They knew where I was now. A firefight in this choked environment was suicide. I needed to break contact, get back to the airboat. As I retreated, dodging behind trees, another burst of fire chewed up the ground near the stacked shipping containers. One of the heavy green boxes took multiple hits, ripping open a section of its metal skin. And I saw it. Just a glimpse, before I had to dive for cover again. Not guns, not explosives. Inside the container, nestled in protective foam cradles, were the sleek, unmistakable shapes of missile guidance systems. Multiple units. Sophisticated. The kind that didn't belong in a swamp, or anywhere outside a high-security military base. The weapons plans sold at the auction weren't just theoretical. Zukhov wasn't just brokering deals. He was stockpiling actual high-tech weaponry. Right here. Deep in the Everglades. This hidden arsenal was real, operational, and terrifyingly advanced. Another burst of gunfire kicked up mud near my feet. I had the confirmation I needed, deadly confirmation. Now I just had to get out of here, alive, to do something about it. The swamp suddenly felt a lot smaller, and the hunt was on again. Chapter 8. Getting out of the Everglades was worse than getting in. The firefight had scattered Zukhov's men, but they'd regroup, fan out. They knew the swamp, I didn't, not this deep. I ditched the airboat miles from the facility, sinking it in a deep pool thick with hyacinths, and struck out overland, wading through stagnant water, pushing through sawgrass that sliced at my clothes and skin, trusting a cheap compass and a prayer. The heat was a physical weight, the humidity sucked the air from my lungs, and clouds of mosquitoes feasted on any exposed patch of skin. Twice I had to detour widely around gators sunning themselves on muddy banks, their eyes ancient and reptilian, showing no fear. It took the rest of the night and most of the next day, moving slow, staying hidden, rationing the last of my water. Exhaustion gnawed at me, and the gash on my arm from a ricochet during the firefight throbbed insistently. Finally, late in the afternoon, I stumbled onto an old raised tram road, long abandoned, used now only by fishermen and poachers. Following it east for miles, I eventually reached a desolate stretch of 2-lane blacktop bordering the conservation area. Filthy, scratched, dehydrated, looking like something dredged from the bottom of a canal, I managed to flag down a beat-up pickup truck driven by a Seminole man whose face remained impassive as I offered him the last usable 50 from my dwindling cash for a ride back towards Miami-Dade. He didn't ask questions, just nodded and cranked up the radio, filling the cab with crackling country music. Back in the anonymous sprawl, I found another motel, this one even grimier than the last, paid cash and showered for a long time, letting the hot water sluice away the swamp muck and some of the bone-deep weariness. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford yet. I needed to think. Zukhov, the resorts, the auction, Varga's betrayal, the Everglades arsenal packed with missile components. It was a sprawling operation, sophisticated, well-funded. Too well-funded for simple smuggling profits alone. The kind of tech I saw in that container cost fortunes and required logistical support far beyond what Zukhov's imported muscle could provide alone. It needed local infrastructure, local protection, local money, cleaned, laundered, and funneled through legitimate channels. It circled back to Silas Thorne's initial complaint: financial irregularities at his resorts. Skimming, Pym had called it. But maybe it wasn't skimming from the resorts. Maybe it was money being funneled through them, using their complex corporate structures and vast cash flows as a laundry service for Zukhov's operation. Who had that kind of access, that kind of power, tied into Thorne's world but operating with their own agenda? I booted up the ruggedized laptop from my cache, connecting through multiple VPNs and encrypted browsers, basic precautions that felt pitifully inadequate against the resources Zukhov likely commanded. I started digging, cross-referencing Thorne's known business partners, major investors in the resort holding companies, board members of associated charities, the kind of people who populated the glossy photos at events like the Sea Turtle Gala. I focused on entities with complex international ties, shell corporations, and those involved in sectors that could plausibly handle sensitive technology or logistics: shipping, private aviation, advanced manufacturing, import-export. Hours blurred. Coffee grew cold. My eyes burned from staring at the screen, tracing faint connections, following trails of digital breadcrumbs through financial reports, incorporation documents, donation records. Then a name started to surface repeatedly, like a body bumping against submerged rocks. Harrison Croft. Croft's name was Miami royalty. Old family money, blended seamlessly with new tech fortunes. His face beamed down from hospital wings, graced the programs of symphony galas, adorned the letterheads of countless charitable foundations. He was the epitome of respectable wealth, a pillar of the community, untouchable. Yet, his primary investment firm, Croft Capital Ventures, had quiet but significant stakes in the parent companies of both the Palmetto Shores Grand and the Azure Star Resort. Furthermore, several of Croft's nonprofit foundations had made massive, vaguely earmarked donations to logistics and tech firms that, after peeling back 3 layers of shell corporations, seemed to lead towards entities previously flagged by financial watchdogs as potential Zukhov fronts. It was circumstantial, buried deep, meticulously obscured, but the pattern was there. Croft wasn't just providing cover. He was likely the financial engine, the local partner giving Zukhov the legitimacy and the means to operate on such a massive scale right under everyone's noses. The phantom financier. Finding proof, concrete proof linking Croft directly to Zukhov and the arsenal, was the next step. A step I wasn't sure how to take without walking directly into the fire. I needed more information, maybe leverage against Thorne himself to force his hand. I considered using the sat phone Pym had provided, trying to feed Thorne, via Pym, sanitized intel about Croft's potential involvement, gauge his reaction, maybe secure more resources. Risky, but I was running out of options. Before I could decide, I ran a quick search for local news headlines, a habit born of paranoia. The screen refreshed, and there it was. A banner across the Miami Herald's website. Prominent attorney Arthur Pym found dead in luxury condo. Police seek person of interest. My blood froze. Pym, Silas Thorne's man. The reedy voice, the expensive loafers crunching on the dock. Dead. I clicked the link, scanned the article, my gut twisting into a tighter knot with every word. Pym found shot execution style. No forced entry. And then the line that made my world tilt. Police are seeking Jack Kincaid, a private investigator reportedly hired by Pym shortly before his death, for questioning. Kincaid, considered armed and dangerous, is also being sought in connection with the recent homicide of bait shop owner Finley "Fins" Delaney. Photos of Finn's shop, cordoned off with police tape. An old, grainy surveillance photo of me from some long-forgotten security gig, looking grim and menacing. Framed. Perfectly, brutally framed. Finn's murder, now Pym's. They weren't just hunting me in the shadows anymore. They'd painted a target on my back for every cop in the state. Zukhov, Croft, whoever gave the order, had anticipated my next move, maybe tracked my attempt to access Thorne's network, or simply decided it was time to cut me off completely, discredit me utterly. I was toxic. Thorne wouldn't touch me now, even if he believed me. I had the truth, or pieces of it, about a hidden arsenal ready to arm the worst people in the world, financed by a local saint, and I was suddenly the most wanted man in Florida. The stakes hadn't just risen, they'd gone supernova. And I was trapped square in the blast radius. Chapter 9. The motel room suddenly felt like a cage, the flickering neon sign outside pulsing like a migraine. Jack Kincaid, person of interest, armed and dangerous. Wanted for the murders of a slimeball lawyer and a twitchy informant. It was neat. Too neat. Zukhov, or more likely the meticulously careful Harrison Croft, had slammed the door shut, boxing me in, turning the entire state into hostile territory. Running wasn't enough. I needed to disappear, then find a way to punch back. First, erase the tracks. The laptop, potentially compromised if Pym's death was linked to my attempt to use the sat phone network, went into the motel ice bucket, filled with water. A short, brutal bath for the electronics. Varga's chip I kept. It felt like the only concrete thing I had left. I wiped down every surface in the room, donned the last set of clean, anonymous clothes from my cache, and slipped out the back window just as the first hint of gray light softened the edges of the night. Walking felt safer than driving, easier to blend, to vanish into alleys or melt into early morning crowds. I needed distance from Miami, and I needed help. Real help. Not the compromised assistance of Silas Thorne or the treacherous alliance with Maria Varga. There was only one person left from my old life who fit the bill, someone who owed me nothing but might help anyway, simply because the world had chewed him up and spit him out almost as thoroughly as it had me. Sully. Contacting him was the trick. Standard channels were suicide. Zukhov's people, and now the cops, would be watching everything connected to my known past. But years ago, Sully and I had set up a dead man's switch, an emergency protocol using antiquated tech, a specific payphone on a specific corner in Orlando, a coded message left on a defunct answering service number, triggered only by a unique sequence of coin drops and dialed tones. It felt absurdly analog in a digital world, which was precisely why it might still be clean. Getting to Orlando took the better part of the day. A nerve-wracking journey involving ditching my current burner phone, hopping a Greyhound bus using cash and a fake name I hadn't used in years, constantly scanning faces, expecting a tap on the shoulder at any moment. The payphone stood on a sun-baked corner near a laundromat, looking forlorn and anachronistic. I went through the sequence, the clicks and tones feeling like ancient incantations. I left no message, just the trigger. If Sully was alive and listening, he'd know I was in trouble. The protocol dictated a meeting place, and time 24 hours later, a specific bench in Lake Eola Park. The next 24 hours were the longest of my life. Hiding in plain sight, nursing cheap coffees in diners, dozing fitfully in the back row of a 24-hour cinema showing kung fu reruns, jumping at shadows, my face staring back at me from a crumpled newspaper left on a bus station seat. Armed and dangerous. Lake Eola Park pulsed with Orlando's manufactured cheerfulness. Swan boats glided on the water, tourists snapped photos. I sat on the designated bench, feeling exposed, vulnerable. Then a figure sat down at the other end, seemingly engrossed in feeding the pigeons from a small paper bag. Older, heavier than I remembered, wearing a faded fishing hat and sunglasses that hid his eyes, but the set of his shoulders, the way he moved with a quiet economy of motion, that was Sully. Ex-DIA, specializing in signals intelligence and inconvenient truths, until the agency decided his truths were too inconvenient. "Long time, Jack," he said quietly without looking at me, scattering more birdseed. "You look like hell." "Feel worse," I admitted. "You saw the news. Hard to miss. You aiming for the FBI's most wanted, or just local celebrity?" His voice was dry, devoid of judgment. "It's a frame, Sully. All of it. Usually is, with you." He tossed the last of the seed, crumpled the bag. "So, who are we hiding from this time? Besides every cop in Florida." I told him everything, starting with Pim showing up at my boat, the resorts, Zukhov, the Cyrillic markings, the gala, Varga, the coded napkin, Finn's warning, Finn's death, the island auction, the weapons plans, the betrayal, Varga's data chip, the Everglades arsenal, the missile components, Pim's murder, Harrison Croft. I laid it all out, the whole sprawling, ugly mess. Sully listened patiently, his expression unreadable behind the dark glasses. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment, watching a swan boat drift past. "Zukhov. Croft. Missile parts in the glades. You don't step in puddles, Jack. You dive headfirst into cesspools." He sighed. "All right. My safe house. It's clean off-grid. We can work there. But you walk about 10 paces behind me, and if things go sideways, I never saw you before in my life." Sully's safe house was a nondescript apartment in a sprawling complex near the airport, the kind of transient place where nobody noticed anyone else. Inside it was Spartan but functional. Blackout curtains, minimal furniture, and an impressive array of humming electronics connected to dedicated, untraceable satellite uplinks. "Let's see the chip Varga girl was hiding," Sully said, pulling up a chair to a monitor displaying complex diagnostic screens. I handed it over. He plugged it into a specialized reader, fingers flying across a keyboard, bypassing security protocols I hadn't even seen. "She had layers on this thing," he muttered. "Location data was the easy part. What else did she tuck away?" He worked steadily, decrypting files, cross-referencing code fragments against known databases. "Okay, got some fragmented communication logs here. Encrypted PGP, looks like. Between Varga and someone using a heavily anonymized relay. Damn, this is military-grade encryption." He frowned. "But there are metadata fragments, routing points, cross-reference that with known Zukhov associates." While Sully worked his magic, I paced, fueled by nervous energy and Sully's industrial-strength coffee. Croft was the key. The funding, the logistics. Zukhov provided the muscle and the merchandise, but Croft provided the respectable cover, the pathway through legitimate channels. The Everglades arsenal wasn't just a stockpile, it was a staging point. But staging for what? "Got something," Sully said suddenly, leaning closer to the screen. "These aren't just comm logs. Mixed in here are partial shipping manifests. Standard containerized cargo listings, heavily coded, but look at the routing. Originates from a logistics hub controlled by a Croft subsidiary near Port Everglades." My gut tightened. "What's the cargo?" "Masked as agricultural machinery parts and water desalination units. Standard cover for heavy hardware. But the weight displacement, the specific container types noted, they match high-density military equipment. And look at the destination." He highlighted a code. "That's a deep-water port in the Grenadines. Scheduled arrival, 72 hours from now." "The Caribbean," I breathed. "Zukhov's playground. He's moving the arsenal." "Looks like it," Sully confirmed. "Specifically, a freighter called the St. Nicholas. Flagged out of Panama, owned by another Croft Shell Corporation. It left Port Everglades 12 hours ago, currently steaming southeast. He pulled up a satellite tracker feed, showing a lone vessel icon moving steadily across the blue expanse. Unusual route, minimal ice broadcast, running dark mostly. Fits the profile for a black shipment. The pieces clicked into place. The auction might have been partly real, partly misdirection, selling off some plans while the main hardware was already being prepped for transport. The Everglades facility was the assembly and staging point. Now, the St. Nicholas was carrying a belly full of advanced missile components, heading for the Caribbean, maybe for delivery to a state sponsor, a terrorist group, or for Zukhov's own use in whatever power play he was planning. A massive arms shipment heading south right now, I said, the scale of it settling heavily in my gut. Sully nodded grimly. Looks like your phantom financier is about to make a very real, very deadly delivery, Jack. Question is, what are we going to do about it? He looked at me, his expression serious. Stopping that ship, that's priority one. Clearing your name comes second to preventing whatever hell those missile parts are going to unleash. Chapter 10. The St. Nicholas is the delivery truck, Sully muttered, eyes glued to the satellite feed tracking the freighter's slow crawl across the Caribbean map. But Zukhov and Croft, they wouldn't finalize a deal like this on some rust bucket freighter. Too exposed. Too déclassé. He tapped a few keys, pulling up satellite photos, cross-referencing maritime databases. Zukhov runs a flagship yacht. The Nebuchadnezzar. 300 feet of ostentatious overkill. Left Monaco 2 weeks ago, currently loitering off the Lesser Antilles, well south of the St. Nicholas's projected course. A rendezvous, I said. They transfer the cargo or finalize the deal near the destination. The yacht offers security, luxury for the buyers, deniability. Exactly, Sully agreed. The freighter brings the goods, the yacht hosts the closing party. If we want to stop this, hitting the freighter is just swatting the delivery guy. We need to hit the head office, Zukhov's yacht. Hitting a state-of-the-art mega yacht, crawling with Zukhov's professional muscle, bristling with countermeasures, somewhere in the middle of the ocean. It sounded like a suicide mission wrapped in an impossibility. How do we even get close, Sully? Let alone on board? We don't knock, Sully said, a predatory glint in his eye I hadn't seen since our Langley days. We get invited. He turned back to his console. If they're planning a ship-to-ship transfer, or finalizing handover protocols for those missile components near the Grenadines, they'll need specialists. Not just Zukhov's gunmen, but people who understand secure cargo logistics, hazardous materials protocols, maybe even customs brokerage, however phantom. He started typing, rapidly. We need to create someone essential, someone Croft's side of the operation would provide, someone Zukhov would expect. Thus, Marco Visser was born. Dutch national, background in secure logistics out of Rotterdam, specializing in sensitive cargo transfers in challenging maritime environments. Employed, on paper, by a Panamanian subsidiary of Croft Capital Ventures that legitimately handled high-value shipping. Sully worked for hours, weaving Visser's digital ghost into existence, employment records, security clearances backdated, travel histories, even seeding mentions on obscure industry forums. He fabricated urgent communications from Croft's logistics chief, routed through secure channels Visser would plausibly use, recommending Visser be dispatched immediately to the Nebuchadnezzar to oversee the final handling protocols for the desalination equipment arriving via the St. Nicholas. It's thin, Sully admitted, leaning back, rubbing his tired eyes. But plausible. Croft's people value efficiency and plausible deniability. Visser looks like their kind of expert, summoned last minute. Zukhov won't question Croft's arrangements unless given a reason. He pointed to the screen. According to this internal routing memo I intercepted and modified, Marco Visser is instructed to proceed immediately to Cunawan Airport in the Grenadines. Transport to the yacht will be arranged from there. Flight leaves Fort Lauderdale in 6 hours. Getting from Orlando to Fort Lauderdale, bypassing my existing arrest warrant, required more of Sully's ingenuity, a borrowed identity, a convoluted route avoiding major hubs, and a final nerve-wracking walk through airport security where my Visser credentials barely passed muster. The flight itself was torture, every announcement, every bit of turbulence setting my teeth on edge. Cunawen was postcard-perfect Caribbean. Turquoise water, white sand, green hills, and an airstrip big enough for private jets and small commercial flights. Waiting near the customs shed, leaning against a gleaming black Range Rover, was a man built like a fire hydrant, squeezed into a tight-fitting polo shirt bearing the Nebuchadnezzar's discreet gold crest. He held a tablet displaying M. Visser. No questions, just a curt nod and a gesture towards the vehicle. We drove in silence to a secluded jetty where a helicopter waited, rotors already spinning lazily in the humid air. The same yacht crest adorned its fuselage. Within minutes, we were airborne, banking out over the stunning blue water, leaving the picture-perfect island behind. Below, the sea was vast, empty. Then, maybe 20 minutes later, it appeared on the horizon, growing steadily larger, the Nebuchadnezzar. She was magnificent, terrifyingly so. Sleek white lines, multiple decks, tinted windows concealing God knows what, a helipad aft, radar domes and antenna arrays sprouting like metallic mushrooms. A floating palace built on blood money and paranoia. As the helicopter descended towards the stern helipad, I saw guards discreetly positioned on the upper decks, automatic weapons held ready, but not obviously displayed. Stepping onto the polished teak deck felt like stepping into another world. The air hummed with quiet efficiency. Crew members in crisp white uniforms moved silently. The fire hydrant-shaped man handed me off to a severe-looking woman with a clipboard and an earpiece. "Mr. Visser? Welcome aboard the Nebuchadnezzar. I am Helga, the purser. Your credentials have been verified. You will be escorted to your quarters. Mr. Zukhov expects a preliminary briefing from you regarding the transfer protocols within the hour. Please be prompt." Her smile didn't reach her eyes, cold as a glacier. My cabin wasn't a cabin. It was a stateroom, luxurious and impersonal, all cream leather and polished chrome, with a picture window overlooking the endless ocean. State-of-the-art comms panel, plush bed, ridiculously oversized bathroom. A gilded cage. I quickly scanned for bugs, found 2 audio, 1 micro camera, expertly concealed but detectable if you knew what to look for. Standard procedure for Zukhov, no doubt. Assume everything is monitored. I changed into the slightly more formal clothes Sully had packed for Visser, mentally rehearsing the jargon and procedures related to secure cargo handling. An hour later precisely, Helga escorted me to an observation lounge near the bow. Panoramic windows offered a breathtaking view. Sitting in a plush armchair, swirling amber liquid in a crystal glass, was Sergei Zukhov. He looked even more imposing up close than he had at the auction. Perfectly tailored silk shirt, watchful gray eyes that missed nothing. He didn't rise, just gestured to the chair opposite him. "Mr. Visser, thank you for coming on such short notice. Mr. Croft's associates assure me you are the best at smoothing complex transfers. I ensure cargo integrity and secure handover according to specified protocols, Mr. Zukhov," I replied, keeping my voice level, professional, meeting his gaze steadily. Marco Visser would be competent, confident, perhaps slightly mercenary. "Excellent." He took a slow sip of his drink. "The consignment arrives tomorrow evening. Our clients are particular. They will be joining us shortly. Any deviation from the agreed schedule or protocol will be unacceptable." His eyes bored into me. "I trust your arrangements are foolproof?" "My protocols minimize risk and ensure chain of custody," I said, careful not to overpromise. "Assuming the departing vessel cooperates fully and conditions are stable." He gave a slight nod, seemingly satisfied for the moment. "Good. Helga will provide you with the final manifest codes and rendezvous coordinates. Familiarize yourself. We tolerate no errors on the Nebuchadnezzar. He waved a dismissive hand. Walking back to my cabin, escorted by Helga's silent disapproval, my mind raced. Clients joining shortly. The buyers were coming here. The St. Nicholas was arriving tomorrow evening. Zukhov. The buyers. Croft's man, me supposedly. All gathering on this floating fortress for the final act. The game of deception was fully underway. I was inside, accepted for now. But the air thrummed with danger, and the clock was ticking down towards a rendezvous that could either be stopped or would unleash catastrophe. And somewhere out there, the St. Nicholas plowed steadily onward, carrying its deadly cargo. Chapter 11. The air on the Nebuchadnezzar grew thick with anticipation, as dusk bled across the Caribbean sky, painting the clouds in lurid streaks of orange and purple. Tomorrow evening, Zukhov had said, which meant tonight was for final preparations, for the buyers to arrive, for the tension to coil tighter and tighter. Through my cabin's picture window, I watched the sea, calm on the surface, concealing depths just like the polished facade of this yacht concealed its deadly purpose. Sully's voice filtered through the tiny, subdermal communicator near my ear. A last-minute gift slipped to me before I left his safe house was a low murmur, barely audible even to me. Buyers arriving. 3 Gulfstream jets landed Cunawan within the last hour. Helo transfers commencing now. My plan, such as it was, felt terrifyingly fragile. Disabling the transfer was paramount. Sully had identified the primary crane controls and hydraulics systems located on the aft deck near the helipad, plausible territory for Marco Visser to inspect before the freighter arrived. He'd also pinpointed junction boxes for the yacht's primary propulsion and steering systems in the aft engine control room, 1 deck below. If I could cripple both the transfer mechanism and the yacht's maneuverability, I could potentially strand the operation, buying time for whatever authorities Sully might nudge into action once the shooting started. Planting the compact, high-yield explosive charges Sully had provided for Visser's emergency toolkit had to be timed perfectly. The first helicopter arrived, disgorging the grim-faced woman from the auction and her entourage. The second brought the smiling, snake-eyed cartel man and his silent muscle. The third delivered someone new, a delegation of stern-looking East Asians in severe suits. Zukhov greeted them personally on the helipad with icy cordiality. The players were assembled. Under the guise of a final inspection, I made my way aft, nodding curtly to the guards who watched my every move. "Mr. Visser," one grunted, "making sure your equipment is ready." "Just ensuring compliance with stability protocols during lift," I replied, tapping a diagnostic tablet Sully had loaded with convincing-looking graphics. I moved towards the massive hydraulic crane mounted near the stern railing, tracing lines, checking connections, all the while palming the first small charge and activating its magnetic clamp, pressing it deep into the guts of the primary hydraulic manifold, hidden from casual view. 1 down. Getting to the engine control room was trickier. I cited a need to verify power load balancing for the crane operation, a plausible enough request for a meticulous logistics expert. Helga, the ever-present purser, eyed me with suspicion but eventually buzzed me through the security checkpoint leading below decks. The control room hummed with power, gauges glowing softly. 2 technicians monitored the boards. Getting them out was impossible. I pretended to check a conduit near the main steering linkage controls, fumbled, dropped my tablet, and as I bent to retrieve it, slapped the second charge onto the critical junction box, setting the timer for 15 minutes, synchronized with the first charge. "Everything satisfactory, Mr. Visser?" one of the technicians asked, his voice laced with boredom. "Perfectly within tolerance," I said, forcing a calm I didn't feel. "Thank you." Back on deck, the atmosphere was electric. Searchlights from the Nebuchadnezzar probed the darkness. And then, emerging from the gloom, was the St. Nicholas, a hulking silhouette against the dying light, wallowing slightly in the gentle swell. Ugly, functional, carrying death in its hold. It maneuvered slowly alongside, close enough for mooring lines to be thrown across, close enough for the transfer crane to reach its decks. Zukhov stood on the observation deck with his buyers, watching the freighter approach. Guards were everywhere now, alert, weapons ready. The time was now or never. I moved towards the stern railing, positioning myself near the crane, ready for the detonation. 10 seconds. 5. 4. Humph. The muffled blast from the hydraulics below deck was felt more than heard, a heavy jolt running through the yacht. Simultaneously, a sharper crack echoed from the engine control room, followed by the shriek of alarms and flickering emergency lights. The main crane shuddered, sagged visibly, hydraulic fluid beginning to spray from its damaged manifold. Below, I could only hope the steering and propulsion linkages were equally shredded. All hell broke loose. What is happening? Zukhov roared, spinning around, his eyes instantly locking onto me, the only person out of place near the damaged crane. Intruder! Sabotage, a guard yelled, raising his rifle. My cover was blown. I drew the pistol I'd concealed under Visser's jacket and fired, not at the guard, but at the base of a nearby searchlight, shattering it, plunging part of the aft deck into confusing darkness. Sully. Now. I hissed into the comm. Gunfire erupted from multiple points. Zukhov's mercs reacted instantly, laying down suppressing fire. Guests screamed, diving for cover. I scrambled behind a large deck winch, as bullets stitched the air where I'd been standing. The fight was on, me against a small army on a floating fortress. I moved, using the chaos, firing sparingly, aiming to disable, to disrupt. Took down 2 guards near the railing, then rolled as another opened up from the upper deck. A bullet tore through the fleshy part of my arm, hot pain flaring. Down below, shouts and confusion indicated the engine room sabotage had taken effect. The yacht felt sluggish, unresponsive in the water. The St. Nicholas crew, likely Zukhov's men too, started firing across from the freighter's deck. Caught in a crossfire. I saw the buyers being hustled towards safety by their own security details. This deal was going south fast. My objective: stop the transfer, stop Zukhov. I fought my way towards the main salon, hoping to corner him, but he was already gone from the observation deck. His mercs were well trained, closing in, cutting off escape routes. A grenade exploded nearby, showering the deck with shrapnel, forcing me back. Another bullet grazed my ribs. Bleeding, struggling to stay focused, I realized direct confrontation was failing. Disable the shipment. That was the core task. If I couldn't stop Zukhov, I had to make sure his merchandise was unusable or unsaleable. The St. Nicholas loomed alongside, its deck partially illuminated by the remaining spotlights and the flickering emergency lights. The missile component containers would be foremost in the hold, ready for the crane that now lay crippled. A desperate idea formed. I spotted a deployable emergency life raft canister near the stern. Using the last of my strength, I fought my way towards it, firing to keep heads down. Reaching it, I triggered the inflation mechanism. The raft exploded outwards, not towards the water, but towards the freighter, creating a momentary bridge, a chaotic obstacle. Then, pulling the pin on my last explosive charge, smaller, designed for breaching, I hurled it across the gap, aiming for the open forward hatch of the St. Nicholas where I guessed the primary cargo hold access would be. It landed short, skittering across the freighter's deck, but close enough. The resulting blast wasn't huge, but it ripped through the hatch coamming, likely starting fires, definitely compromising the integrity of whatever was stored just inside. Smoke billowed from the freighter's hold. Alarms shrieked over there too. Maybe, just maybe, the missile components were damaged, exposed, contaminated. A searing pain shot through my leg as a merc, appearing from nowhere, shot me point blank. I went down hard, my pistol clattering away. Looking up through a haze of pain, I saw him raise his rifle for the kill shot. Suddenly he jerked, spun around, and fell, a throwing knife protruding from his neck. Standing in the shadows near the superstructure, wiping blood from her hand, was Maria Varga. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second, confusion, anger, something unreadable in her expression, before she turned and vanished back into the chaos. What the hell was she doing here? Working for Zukhov? Against him? Before I could process, another figure appeared, stepping calmly out of the smoke near the yacht's damaged helipad. Zukhov. He looked down at me, bleeding on his pristine deck, then glanced towards the burning hatch on the freighter. A flicker of annoyance crossed his features, nothing more. An impressive disruption, Mr. Kincaid, isn't it? He said calmly, ignoring the sporadic gunfire still echoing around the yacht. Costly, but ultimately futile. He gave a small, almost imperceptible signal. From the far side of the yacht, hidden from the main battle, came the low whine of powerful engines, a sleek black speedboat low in the water, pulling away into the darkness. His escape route. He gave me one last look, cold and dismissive. Enjoy the fireworks. Then he turned and walked calmly towards a rope ladder already deployed over the side, disappearing down towards the waiting boat. I tried to push myself up, tried to raise a hand, but the pain was overwhelming. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, growing louder. Sully's call had worked. Help was coming. But Zukhov was gone. The shipment was damaged, disrupted, the deal likely scuttled for now. But I was down, bleeding out on the deck of a billionaire's playground, the mastermind vanishing into the vast, indifferent Caribbean night. Chapter 12. The world swam back into focus in disjointed bursts. Red flashing lights painting white bulkheads. Shouted commands in clipped official tones. The acrid smell of smoke and cordite, overlaid with the salt tang of the sea. Rough hands securing a pressure bandage to my leg, another to my arm. The prick of a needle. Voices fading in and out. I remember the lurch of a helicopter lifting off. The chaos of the Nebuchadnezzar's deck shrinking below, littered with debris and prone figures under emergency lights. Then darkness claimed me again. Recovery wasn't a clean montage of determined physical therapy set to inspiring music. It was slow grinding, and mostly happened within the confines of a sterile white room in a private clinic tucked away on a quiet quay south of Sarasota. Sully had pulled strings I didn't know he still possessed, getting me airlifted off the Navy cutter that intercepted the disabled yacht, and routing me through channels that bypassed official scrutiny, and more importantly, the active warrants for my arrest. My chart probably said, John Smith, boating accident. Weeks blurred into a monotonous cycle of pain medication that left me groggy, physical therapy that felt like medieval torture, and staring at the ceiling fan, listening to the distant cries of gulls. My body knitted itself back together slowly, reluctantly, leaving behind ridges of scar tissue and aches that flared up with the afternoon thunderstorms rolling in off the Gulf. The physical cost was steep. The other costs, those festered deeper. Sully visited twice, materializing quietly, bringing information like offerings. The Nebuchadnezzar and the St. Nicholas were impounded, crawling with investigators from a dozen different acronyms, FBI, DHS, ATF, probably spook agencies I'd never heard of. The damaged missile components found aboard the freighter caused a flurry of hushed international panic before being whisked away to some black site. Most of Zukhov's crew and the buyer's security details were in custody, singing like canaries or stonewalling completely. The big fish. Gone. Zukhov vanished, likely plucked from his speedboat by submarine or seaplane long before the Navy even arrived. Harrison Croft remained untouchable, his lawyers issuing stern denials, Croft himself expressing shock and dismay that his legitimate shipping interests might have been exploited by nefarious elements. No hard evidence tied him directly to Zukhov or the arsenal. Yet, Maria Varga? Not a trace. She'd slipped off the yacht during the firefight as mysteriously as she'd appeared. Ally. Enemy. Opportunist. I still had no damn idea. Just another loose end in a world full of them. And the warrants? I asked Sully during his second visit, watching rain lash against the window. He shrugged, sipping the clinic's terrible coffee. Still active, but less heat. The feds know Pim and Finn's weren't random homicides now. They know it connects to Zukhov, maybe even Croft, though they can't prove it. You're still a person of interest, officially a fugitive, but priorities have shifted. They want Zukhov more. Doesn't mean some ambitious local cop wouldn't still love to slap the cuffs on me. My days of relaxing on the Sea Witch were gone. After Sully left the second time, the silence pressed in again. Time to think. Too much time. I thought about Finn's bleeding out behind his counter. Pim, executed in his condo. Sacrificed pawns. I thought about Varga's knife saving my life after she'd sold me out. Calculated risk? Lingering conscience? Or just ensuring her own survival? I thought about Silas Thorne, safe behind his walls of money, wondering if he even knew the depth of the filth his financial irregularities were tangled up in. Probably didn't care, as long as his own hands stayed clean. This life. Always paddling upstream, against a tide of betrayal and violence. For what? Money. Justice. Just survival. I tried to step away, enjoy the Florida sun, the fishing, the illusion of peace. But the shadows clung. Maybe they were part of me now. Florida, she was a beautiful liar. All sunshine and beaches and swaying palms on the surface, but underneath the currents were dark, full of predators, hidden reefs waiting to tear you apart. Zukhov and Croft were just bigger sharks in a feeding frenzy that never stopped. When the clinic finally discharged me, moving stiffly but mostly healed, Sully arranged one last discreet transport. Back to the marina where it all started. The Sea Witch bobbed in her slip, looking slightly neglected but blessedly intact. Nobody had connected her to Jack Kincaid, fugitive, yet. My little slice of transient peace. Sully met me on the dock, handed me a package. New burner phone, some cash, a clean set of ids, different name, plausible background. Keep your head down, Jack, he advised gruffly. Zukhov won't forget. Neither will Croft. Where do they go from here, Sully? Zukhov. Underground. Rebuilding, probably planning his revenge. He lost face, lost merchandise. He'll surface again. Croft. He'll lay low, manage his charities, host his galas, and keep laundering money until someone finds the smoking gun. He paused. There was one other thing on that Varga chip. Buried deep. Another set of coordinates, encrypted differently. Took me weeks to crack. He handed me a single sheet of paper. On it was a sequence of numbers and letters, meaningless on their own. Below it, Sully had written, possible dead drop. Location, remote airstrip, Okeechobee County. Okeechobee. Back towards the swampy heart of Florida. A dead drop left by Varga. Information she hadn't wanted Zukhov to find. Or another trap. I looked from the paper to the familiar lines of my boat, then out across the marina towards the open water, shimmering under the relentless Florida sun. The shadow was still there, Zukhov's shadow, Croft's shadow, maybe Varga's too. It stretched long over the state, a promise of more trouble to come. The cost of this life was etched into my scars, into the memory of the dead. But walking away. It seemed I wasn't built that way. Not while Zukhov was still out there, and not while there were still questions twisting in the dark. Okeechobee County. Maybe it was time to take the Sea Witch inland, see what other secrets the Florida shadows were hiding. The next mission hadn't found me yet, but I had a feeling I knew where to start looking. The adventures continue. Can I send you conscripted for free? Even more in the Declassified series. Check out all 8 books on Amazon.